The Hunted by JakNekon. Far south of the Mexican border, deep in the jungles of South America, a small village sits. The buildings are older but well cared for, though the sharpened wooden spikes around the perimeter of the camp are new. New and yet stained with something dark and in a few cases wet. In many of the buildings, fires are lit, meager meals cooked as mothers soothe fearful tears, and fathers watch the night, weapons in hand. The attack earlier had been fierce, yet it was repelled easily enough. Perhaps it has already fed somewhere else and dampened its own fury. The thought was less comforting than perhaps it should have been. In the shadows of the trees and village itself, two small figures slide from one shadow to another, hoping to avoid the gaze and temper of the adults. Javier adjusted the quiver at his hip and gently tested the longbow, trying to calm his thundering nerves and drown out his sister, Tia. "This is crazy," she hissed at him in the tongue of their people. "We should be in bed." "Yes, we probably should," her brother agreed in the "I'm listening but not really" voice. "But the village is starving, and if we don't take advantage of the time when we know it's not near, we won't get a better chance." As though on cue, Tia's stomach complained of its own lack of food. She hid her embarrassment by not looking him in the face. "Oh, be quiet. You don't have to follow me, you know." Even the soft touch of his boot on wet leaves underfoot felt like someone clashing cooking pans together as he strained to listen. Hunting was stressful enough. Knowing you could be the difference between someone starving or thriving, but to do so after dark, knowing that thing could be somewhere nearby, licking its wounds. He shakes off the thought quickly. "I will return soon, hopefully with food. Go back home. I'll be back before you've even fallen asleep." He gave her a soft grin in the moonlight before stepping away from the safety of the town wall. He crossed the open space between home and the tree line swiftly, ducking in among the trunks, listening. No alarm from the village, and only the usual night calls from the jungle itself. Another breath to steady his nerves, and he forces himself away from the tree, starting further into the forest. It was funny in the way such things are. His papa and tios had taken him out hunting since he was old enough to pull a bowstring. In his mind, he could pick out almost every tree, stream, and path from the village to the small rivers that fed the great river. So he did not fear becoming lost. He knew the calls, scents, and tracks of every creature in this forest, or so he believed, wrapped in youth's folly. And so he, quote-unquote, knew that what he could kill, what he could avoid, and how to escape what he couldn't do either to. Truly, he would have felt himself the king of the forest this night, if not for the monster. He had never seen it himself, only heard from those who had, hushed whispers that spoke of a beast between a jaguar and a bear, fangs that gleamed in the moonlight the size of machetes. He shook off the image, trying to form in his imagination. "Stop that. You are the chieftain's son. You are the chieftain's son." He repeats it under his breath, a chant to keep his heart in its cage and his feet moving forward. He knew where a group of peccaries usually congregated, a creature small enough for him to take down one with his own with a bow and knife, yet would be a welcome addition to the cooking fire. Every so often he'd pause to listen and watch. He might see an armadillo snuffle past, or hear some night bird or bat flit after an insect. He listened because he knew, aside from the monster, others hunt the night. The jaguars prowled the trees, anaconda and caiman glide the waters, and even the fer-de-lance demanded respect in its own little kingdom. He turned to look back at the village, gauging how far he'd gone, how long it would take for him to return. Though the lights beckoned him, he knew he still had farther to go, to find something to make this journey worth the risk. As he rounded the next group of trees, he slowed again. There was a smell, a bad one, on the wind. It was the smell of peccary, A lot of peccary. And blood. A great deal of blood. His booted feet thump against something, and he has a brief moment to identify the head of one of the pig-like beasts rolling away from his foot. And slowly, his blood runs cold. He stopped dead and listened. He could hear something up ahead. Something he'd never heard before. Sound of something slowly snapping bone. The steady chewing of a blood-filled maw, and then, as the severed peccary head broke through the shrubbery, a deep, low growl. So low it made his own bones shudder. Slowly he backed up, keeping an eye on the spot the sounds had come from. It was quiet now, until a branch cracked and crashed to the ground, shattered by the weight of... Javier did not care what. He did not care if he had an arrow drawn or not. All he knew was run. Run as fast as he can. Run until his heart bursts. He can hear it behind him now. The thunder of paws too large for any jaguar. Too large. He uses a stump to jump and grab a tree branch, dragging himself up to the next, to the next. If it was too big for the branches, he'd seen that. Too big to take the path of the jaguar or the ocelot. Maybe, if he can get high enough, it'll frustrate itself and leave. The tree shook, and then shook harder. It shook as if the rains hammered it, as if the ground simply could not hold it. As wood cracked and shattered and the tree groaned, falling sharply to earth, his last thoughts were, "I'm going to die." And as he looked up through the mud and blood on his face into the jaws of his killer, his last word, "Papa?" Back in the village, Tia woke screaming. Sometime later in Manaus, Brazil. Matthew Hughes was working at one of the zoological parks the capital boasted when he received the call. The city council wanted a quiet word with him. No, really. Quote unquote, "We need a quiet word with you." Click. Never in his life could he say someone needing a quiet word with him turned out well. If he wasn't in trouble, someone else was, and they always wanted him to bail them out. It was never the kind of call you looked forward to. Not that he didn't love his work. Being an animal handler and wrangler was steady business. Between helping zoos and conservation parks with their residents, and dealing with problem animals whose main problem was coming too close to human settlements, he could never say he felt bored or underappreciated. Though there were times he did feel a little too much like a troubleshooter rather than a wrangler, making the terrible decision to put down an animal that couldn't be relocated. Too many quiet words ended that way. Still, he made sure the workers at the park could spare him for a bit, and grabbed his truck from the trek to City Hall. He let his mind drift a bit on the ride. The great way to the Brazilian Amazon. It's a beautiful city, and its closeness to one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet made it a haven for researchers and tourists alike. The other edge of the blade, however, was that too many people, in his opinion, forgot that biodiverse also meant untamed and wild, and that's where people like him came in. Anaconda in the hotel pool? Yep. Capybara eating your begonias? On it. Harpy eagle nesting nearby, eyeballing your pets? What is this, Thursday? He pulled into the parking lot and headed inside City Hall, where a well-dressed and very nervous young man took him by the elbow to discreetly guide him to a meeting room. Apparently, whatever the problem was, they didn't want to even risk him speaking to the front desk. Not a good sign. Even worse was when he was led through a door marked Mayor and found not just the mayor in his nervous-looking cabinet, but a man in a very expensive suit, quickly introduced as the vice governor. That uneasy feeling in his belly sank well below his navel. Whatever was wrong was apparently on a national level. "Senor Hughes, good to see you to join us." The vice governor shook his hand, then led him to where the rest of the room were gathered. The meeting place was awash in pictures, file folders, coffee cups, overflowing ashtrays. Several boards set up around the end of the room were tacked with maps and more photos, all of them marked with red markers. The gut weight cannonballed. This was the kind of setup you made for tracking something. And judging by what he caught in a glance, that's something wide-ranging and violent. Please, have a seat. Matthew took an empty chair, and after a rapid-fire round of introductions, unnecessary, he'd worked with almost everyone in the room from previous assignments, but he nodded at each in turn. They quickly got down to business. The vice governor fell silent as one of the cabinet spoke. Senor Hughes, you are well versed in the people and animals of Amazonas, yes? Matthew thought the fact that he spoke near fluent Portuguese was a pretty clear yes, but again, manners. I feel I've got a solid grasp of flora, fauna, and tribal relations in the area, yes. Good. Wonderful. Because I fear we are in somewhat dire need of aid regarding a rogue animal terrorizing the area, including several villages. Terrorizing is a broad term, senor. Livestock killings, disrupting of the hunting and fishing areas, destruction of property. They nodded like puppets on strings, and one woman finally spoke. All of that, and there have been some deaths. His blood ran a little colder. How many? 7 recorded, including the niece of the governor's wife. Matthew's eyes flicked to the vice governor, who stared back as if daring him to make a comment. In honesty, he didn't need this important relative. The 6 of the others had families in mourning as well. How long? 2.5 months, perhaps? He had to blink at that one. All that, including 7 deaths in 2 months? That meant something major had changed in that area, and recently. Any signs of major ecological changes? Earthquakes, wildfires, mud flows? He asked. This sounded like something getting knocked out of its home turf and trying to readjust. Badly. Not that we have seen. The man in charge of monitoring weather patterns and geological data piped up, pointing out a distinct lack of anything that might indicate habitat changes on his charts. With reluctance, he turned his attention to the photos on the table. They were, helpfully, divided into normal evidence, pictures of paw prints, claw marks high up on trees, a fur sample, etc., and gruesome, a goat that looked like it had been bitten in half, a close-up of a claw wound that he hoped was instantly fatal, remains found in some underbrush, you know. All of which painted a really grim story. I'm sure you're aware, but this kind of thing you see in a large predator, one that either can't catch its usual prey or has been driven out of its territory. The nods are there again, but they're not meeting his eyes now. He looked around the table before he spoke again. I see you've already been told all of this. What am I missing? Glances shot from one face to the next, until finally the assistant to the mayor sighed. That's what we need you to find out, senor. Our own biologists have been unable to identify the animal. Fur and DNA came back without a clear match. We cannot send in the National Guard without risking an incident, and the local tribes refuse to leave the area. Frankly, we need to find whatever the animal is and ensure it cannot cause any more trouble. Matthew hated when they talked like this. Made him feel like some gangland hitman getting the go-ahead. Still, all that destruction in less than 3 months. He sighed. Fine. I suppose for the sake of human and animal alike. Excellent. They looked much more happy about this, but he let that go. Until another of the cabinet pointed to a circle on the map. We think it would be in your best interest to begin here. Our last recorded... He trailed off as everyone was staring at him now. Matthew in confusion, the rest of the board in utter annoyance. Your last recorded what? He leaned toward the board. It's not the latest attack, I can see that. Did someone see it there recently, or find some sign of it? Another round of pass the glance ensued, and now an older woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days spoke up. The last record we have of the gentleman we hired before you. Matthew almost face-palmed, but took a moment to calm himself. I see. So you hired another wrangler, and he went radio silence. At least that explains some of the awkwardness.
Well, yes, of a sort.
Oh boy. Matthew pushed harder. Someone I know?
Perhaps. Have you ever met the Signor Albert Drybeck?
Tell me you're joking.
Signor?
Albert Drybeck is a licensed butcher, a poacher in all but name.
We are aware of the rumors surrounding him.
Let me assure you, whatever you've heard, the truth is worse. Matthew rubbed his temples. I can't for the life of me imagine why... He trailed off and sighed again. You wanted this done quick and quiet, and you didn't ask questions, right? The mayor and city council looked sheepish, while the vice-governor scowled at them. The scene reminded Matthew strongly of school children caught cheating on a test, now having to redo it with the principal watching. And it wasn't as though he could simply say no and walk away at this point. The whole strange ordeal called out to him, plus too many lives were at stake. Ladies and gentlemen, Senior Vice Governor, I can't say I'm pleased with how you approached this situation, but you all seem aware that I won't turn it down. I'll need all the information you have, maps, photographs, eyewitness statements, sketches, anything. He's pleased to see one of the council pulling map cases and folders, no doubt packed in anticipation of his needs. Also, they'll expect my usual payment on delivery. And we can expect your results when? It was the first time the vice governor had spoke since he came in, and it was not a friendly tone. Matthew paused. I'll need at least a day or two to look over all of this, another to coordinate transport and a guide. I'll keep you updated by sat phone at least once a day. If you don't hear from me after a 24-hour period, contact my fellows at the International Wildlife Rescue Society. Past that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm off to find your rogue. Less than an hour later, seated in his office, Matthew pored over the reports of police, rangers, and less officially written accounts from eyewitnesses. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. The pieces were falling into place now, and he wasn't liking the picture they formed. Even at a glance, this was a large animal, far larger than any jaguar he'd encountered or even heard of. Paw prints and eyewitness accounts putting it more at the size of an African lion. Its kills seemed off as well. It appeared to be an ambush predator like a jag, yet by most accounts it hunted from the ground cover or rocky areas, avoiding the usual path of dropping on prey from the trees or ambushing from the water. It also must either be incredibly fast or able to pounce further than an average jaguar, suggesting highly muscled and specialized back legs. Even the bite seems off, sometimes showing the skull-crushing force you saw in a jaguar, other bites to the throat or torso area. He picked up a picture of one of those bite areas and examined it closer. His first thought was he was glad lunch had been a while ago. The next was that something was wrong with the marks, suggesting some kind of dental aberration, maybe a birth defect or a poorly healed injury. Either would explain why such a cat would become a man-eater, a worsening defect or injury making catching normal prey impossible, leaving it to feed on humans. It could even be suffering from a brain parasite similar to a mad cow or wasting disease, which might explain its violent and unpredictable temperament. So why were there also photographs of slaughtered goats and cattle, torn apart peccaries, mostly eaten anacondas, and even what appeared to be the remains of a rival jaguar? This didn't sound like the actions of a physically deformed animal or one suffering brain worms. Terrifyingly, it could be a totally aberrant species, adapted, for lack of a better term, to slaughter. The very thought made his heart crawl up in his throat. He laid the pictures down with another long sigh. Well, if I'm going to figure out anything more in this, I'm going to have to see it in person. He looked at the woman seated nearby. Jessica,
I got your truck filled and ready, packed your usual out-of-contact pack with medikit, survival guide, flint and steel, you name it. Your hunting knife and brush cutter are sharpened, meal pack stowed, water tablets packed. She trailed off for a moment. I suppose the air rifle will be staying here. They don't want it relocated, and frankly, with that kind of size and ferocity, I'd need half the IWRS for help. Never mind, I have no idea what kind of knockout to use and not kill it anyway. I'd get yourself killed pissing it off, Jessica muttered. I heard that, and I meant it too. She picked up her list again. So, aside from firepower, the only other thing to figure out is who's going with you. Matthew smirked. What? You're not coming with me? Come on, it'll be great. Just days and days of tracking a killer jaguar through hot, wet rainforest, making contact with all the local insect life. Keep it up, I'll make sure you forget your secret candy stash. I'm thinking Hugo if he's available. Good choice. You're tracking something you've never seen. She peeked out a nearby window. His truck's here, so I'd say contact him while you can. Matthew was already on the phone. The preparations took less than a day. The drive out of Manaus and to the docks was, well, not quiet, as Matthew had to fill in what blanks he could for Hugo, but it went quickly enough, and soon the pair were loading gear and firearms into a rented boat. The first village they needed to inspect was only accessible by water, though the rest would, hopefully, be reachable on foot. As the silt-rich waters sped under them, Hugo spoke up again. So you're sure this thing is a jaguar? Honestly, I'm not sure of anything right now, except it's large, cat-like, and can eat an entire herd of goats or squadron of peccaries in one go. And it's killed, 6 people? Maybe 7, if Senor Drybeck is... He made the sign of the cross. No idea. Find out when we get there. The guide nodded slowly, eyes already scanning the shoreline. After a while, he pointed to a barely seen cluster of wooden buildings in the trees. We're here. Matthew sighed, pulling on his pack and slipping his rifle strap on his shoulder. So it begins. The first 2 villages were, well, what they expected. Haunted eyes that looked at Hugo with curiosity, and Matthew with the kind of bored disdain he's used to receiving on first introductions. Of course, once they found out why the pair of strangers were in their village, suddenly they couldn't wait to speak with them. The stories were what they expected as well. Livestock butchered in the night, areas of good hunting almost desolate, and their people torn apart by a beast that seemed to barely feel rifle bullets, spears, or arrows, even those treated with poisons. The beast would prowl the area for a few days, attacking the village and devouring the local wildlife, until, if Matthew had to guess, it felt the need to find easier hunts. Getting a description of the animal was trickier. The theme of big cat was definite, emphasis on big. Definitely bigger than a normal jaguar, a couple even stating it was larger than a water buffalo. Horrifying thought. Did it have spots? Maybe. Stripes? Maybe? Fur color described anywhere from brown to tan to blonde to very light red. They'd stay long enough to confirm that they were where they needed to be, pick up the trail, and keep after it. The third village was abandoned. At first they worried the animal had returned and wreaked havoc, but a careful check of the building showed no blood or remains, nor any heavy predator musk. They finally chose the sturdiest they could find and set up a camp inside. A low fire crackling in a makeshift fire pit, they had dinner and a bit of liquid courage for dessert. Matthew finally spoke after a bit. Doesn't make any sense. Hugo looked up from adding more wood to the flames. This whole thing, something this big, this mean, this... Hungry? Hugo puts in. Exactly. This thing should be easy to find. Hell, I'm a little surprised we haven't found more signs of it already. They'd found tracks, claw marks, and even some old scat that now sat in a heavily secured bag in his pack. But of the animal itself, nothing. No calls, no sightings, nothing. I mean, at least we know we're on the right track, more or less. No signs of Drybeck, but they said he passed through the last village, right? Hugo nodded. Said the guy with a fancy rifle showed up, asked him same questions, headed this way. He shrugged. But you're right. I don't see any other campsites on the way. For the moment, we'll just assume this place was empty when he got here and he just kept walking. Okay, but in which direction? Hugo pointed out. Matthew fell silent at that. With no one to point the way, where had Arthur Drybeck decided to wander? No, not wander. He'll have found a track, Matthew said slowly. Drybeck. He's a damn poacher who'd sell his family dog for an extra few bucks. But he's a damn good hunter. He scratched the stubble on his jaw. He'll have found tracks nearby and followed it. God knows this damn thing leaves enough of them. So in the morning, we have a look around, see if we can't pick it up ourselves. Not much other choice, is there? You want first watch or second? Hugo took first, letting Matthew settle into his sleeping bag. With wooden walls around him rather than tent canvas, he felt a bit more secure, so long as he told his brain to forget about the claw marks on those trees. Senor Hughes, wake up. Matthew came awake instantly, a habit he found worked wonders in wildlife rescue and relocation. The fire was a little dim, but he could see the worry on Hugo's face, as well as the man's rifle pointing toward the door. Something is moving around out there. Matthew waited, but not for long, as he could hear it too. Low, heavy breathing, like something scenting the area, searching for something. The two men locked eyes and without another word got in position. Matthew grabbed his Ruger Scout, taking a firing position as Hugo moved to the door. The .308 might not be as heavy as the .45-70 Hugo's lever-action Henry boasted, but there was a reason it was one of the most favored hunting calibers. He held up a hand with 3 fingers and Hugo nodded, moving the heavy wood that he was using to block the door. The sounds were drawing closer. 2 fingers. Hugo moved to grip the door itself, ready to open it and give Matthew the first clear shot. Hopefully. 1 finger. There was a scratching and a strange, excited sound, which turned into a bleat of panic when the door slammed inward, the shot cracking into the night, followed by the sound of a bullet hitting wood, and something very panicked crashing into an empty goat pen. The 2 men blinked and slowly, carefully stepped outside to find a large capybara scrambling under a fence and racing off into the underbrush. They stared after it, then each other, and finally at the broken pot of grain someone had left behind. Capybara, Matthew finally managed once his throat unlatched. Respectfully, senor? No shit. Then they started snickering, then chuckling, and finally breaking into full laughter. Laughter that died away as something screamed, high-pitched and horrible, in the direction the capybara had raced off in. A scream that cut short with deadly finality. The 2 of them kept their rifles trained in that direction as they eased back into the building. The heavy wood blocked the door again, the fire stoked. After a long quiet, ears straining to detect paws on dirt or the heavy pant of a carnivore, they finally spoke again. Well, now we know which way to look tomorrow, Hugo whispers. Matthew nodded. That we do. We have the game cams? See 'em? Good. Tomorrow we set around wherever that poor bastard died. Not stumbling around in the dark looking for an animal I haven't identified, especially on its own territory. Hugo nodded, Sounds good. So we track it, maybe we find a lair, maybe not. Either way, set up a kill zone? Exactly. Matthew stared into the flames. If If I have to put this thing down, I want to do it as fast and humane, and I sure as hell want to get us both home safely. Hugo grinned softly. Amen, my friend. The morning came like thunder. Actual thunder. The rainforests of the Amazon lived up to their name as the heavy drops fell to earth, fattening rivers and rolling soil into mud. Perhaps for some it was a welcome respite from the heat. For a pair of trackers who needed to find an unknown animal by its track in a fresh kill site, it was a washed-out hell. They found the kill site, or at least what they believed was the site. The foliage was trashed, a low-hanging branch scored so deep by claws it was hanging in half. The ground is quickly turning to mud with a little rivulet running down the center of it. Still, one or two tracks had yet to dissolve away, proving the cat had been there, and a few scraps of brown fur and what appeared to be a leg proved the meal it had made of the capybara. Hugo checked half the perimeter, and Matthew took the other half. It wasn't much, but they at least got a general idea of its heading, deeper into the forest, away from the water. This is no damn Ancapitara, Hugo muttered as they put up game cams near the kill and along the track, keeping an eye out not only for the mystery cat, but for any other critter that might decide to use the reins for its own hunting advantage. Yeah, starting to get that feeling too, Matthew said over the splash of rain striking their rain ponchos. Any ideas what it might be? Me? I'm betting some rich asshole bought a big bastard, a lion or a Siberian tiger. Got too big and nasty around his peacocks and ponies, and he lets it go in the rainforest. Makes it somebody else's problem. Matthew nodded. Wasn't a bad theory, really. Exotic pet escaped or tossed out, does whatever it has to survive. How about you? What's your call? Matthew chewed his lip. It's possible it's an aberrant species. He caught the skeptical glance from his companion as he checked the game cam straps. Okay, yes, it's not as likely as yours, but something about it doesn't feel like I'm a sick cat in pain or I'm from a different continent, where am I? To me it feels like I am designed to be this deadly, so watch your ass. Hugo shrugged. Okay, but jaguars, they're already that, at least in my eyes. They hunt from the trees, yes? You got some deer or peccary just walking along, boom! Lands right on you, dead before you even know it. Hell, they poke caiman out of the rivers. This thing, too big for trees, doesn't seem to swim, and yet it's managed to make itself the apex predator in this area, Matthew pointed out as the last game cam was secured. Hugo opened his mouth, then closed it with a small shrug. I can't argue that. They set up a blind a little ways away from the track and some game cams to give out of the rain and hopefully catch a good image of their target. Matthew sighed as he peered out through the mesh. Maybe we should have gone out last night. When we heard it, last night, maybe we should have gone out then and tracked it down. Oh, see him. You and me in our undershirts in the pitch black, rifles ready, looking for a cat that could probably smell how many beans we had for dinner last night. I love my work, amigo, but not enough to die for it. Matthew chuckled. Fair enough. Hours passed slowly. The rain lightened to a misty drizzle, giving the forest a primordial aura, a feeling of being lost in time and space. It would have been enchanting if the two of them weren't beginning to worry that their target may have moved on. It is a wide-ranging beast, Matthew mused quietly. You think I might have kept going? Maybe food's getting scarce. Hugo muttered, and neither of them raised their voice above a whisper, as though the misty fog was pressing down on them as well. Could be. Suppose we can give it another... Bzz, bzz. He froze as the smart device he used to monitor the game cams buzzed at him. An alert on screen. Camera 7 alert. They both stared, hardly daring to believe it.
They couldn't be this lucky. Bzz, bzz. Camera 6 alert. Trying to calm his shaking hands and nerves, Matthew tapped the first alert. A still shot leaped onto the screen. The trees and mist at first made it hard to tell what they were looking at, until they recognized it as a huge furred shoulder and the last glimpse of a pointed ear. Camera 6 was a little higher in the trees, looking down, and caught a shape moving through the ground floor, covering mist, the markings placed by the program setting the shadowed form at over 8 feet long, and a guesstimate weight near 1,000 pounds. Matthew's mouth went dry, and he could feel Hugo tense next to him. Jesus Christ, this thing was huge. Bzz, bzz. Camera 5 alert. Hugo is easing his rifle around, peering out through the blind's mesh as Matthew tapped the new alert, and almost dropped the device. The camera must have been gone off just as the cat, reached it, and the image only cutting off the front part of the muzzle, giving more than enough of an image of a powerful, blunt creature. The head had to be the size of a goddamn grizzly bear, never mind a cat, and the markings he could see didn't match any pattern he could think of in jaguars, leopards, lions, tigers, hell, not even ocelots or bobcats. And the eye was huge, huge and staring, not at the camera, but at something ahead of it. That eye brought back every nightmare of the failed rescues and maulings he'd ever endured. It was an eye that saw the whole world as a buffet, and they were nothing but taste tests. "Something's moving," Hugo breathed. Matthew set the device on its belt hook, his own .308 now in hand. The mesh and the fog didn't make the best of views, but they'd set up the place where, hopefully, the cat would have to pass in order to check out its hunting ground. A shaft of sunlight shone down on the roiling mist as the cat moved into view, like a goddamn spotlight on a stage show. The breath was hauled from Matthew's chest. It was less than a minute, a bare glimpse, yet it made his whole body cower and instinctive, older than the jungles itself. Hugo's eyes were riveted, the rifle frozen somewhere between aiming and not. "What the fuck is that?" "I don't know," Matthew whispered back, "but we're gonna need a bigger boat." "Kay? Movie thing. Never mind." He took his own rifle up and quietly made sure a round was chambered. This was it. Time to see what kind of animal could terrorize a place like the Amazon. As he reached for the zipper to the hide, bzz, bzz, he glanced at his belt. Camera 3 alert. Camera 3. But that one was... Oh, fuck! The world exploded in a hurricane of teeth, claws, and fury. In truth, the hide probably saved their lives. The hide and years of dealing with dangerous animals giving them a kind of sixth sense. The two threw themselves sideways almost on instinct, and the beast had crashed into the half-opened fabric of the door. Matthew yanked his hunting knife free and slashed, not at the mass of steaming fur near him, but at the door, at the material blocking him from freedom, pulling himself free in time to see Hugo do the same on the other side. Hugo's rifle swung from its strap on his arm, and he struggled to get his knife out of the way and bring it up to bear. Matthews was half in the hide still, and his firearms safety instructor would have had a coronary if she'd seen him grab the barrel and pull it out like that. But at this point, every move was a balanced risk, a fact he reminded himself of as the snarl and a paw the size of a dinner plate lashed out at him, sending him stumbling back to put the loaded shot up into the trees somewhere. The cat, giant cat, holy shit, big cat, was this even a cat? Was reducing the blind to shreds, but a roll of thunder from the other side of it brought a shriek and a position shift. Hugo must have fired almost point blank, and barely done more than pissed it off. "Run, you idiot!" Matthew had learned to heed that voice in his head long ago, and now he moved himself forward, gripping the rifle and knife like talismans against death. He let the latter go to dangle on its cord and turned, chambering around and firing the Ruger off his shoulder. The scope felt like it was suddenly eye to eye with the monster, a feeling only confirmed by the enraged snarl. He squeezed off another shot, felt as much as hurt it strike flesh, and then he was throwing himself down as half a ton of death sailed through the spot he'd been standing in. How much damage could this bastard take? The thought was screaming through Matthew's brain as he rolled over and fired against the huge thing, trying to dig claws in the mud for traction. Another shriek of rage and pain, a little dark blood now visible amid the tawny fur. A series of booms to his right as Hugo knelt, chambering and firing in rapid succession. At least one of the three hit, but all it seemed to do was turn the rage on the other man. The monstrous cat finally found a grip, powerful forelimbs spreading, as the hind legs launched at Hugo like a nightmare torpedo. Hugo was too slow for the moment, the same mud now eating his traction and leaving him to catch the end of a swing from one of those clawed frying pans. He half slid, half skidded across the ground to smack into a tree. A wheezing groan, the only sign he's alive. The cat turned, obviously intending to finish its work, when another bullet crashed into its shoulder. Apparently the other prey wasn't smart enough to stay ignored. Matthew chambered another round, backing down the path the cat had come. He couldn't think of anything else. If he could lure it away from Hugo, maybe he could... He could what? How many shots could this nightmare take? What kind of goddamned hell beast? The giant head whipped around after the next shot, and now, looking at it dead on, as it slowly moved to give chase, he saw for the first time the teeth. Not just the teeth in its mouth, those two huge jutting daggers of dentition. Teeth he'd only seen in movies and museums. Jesus Christ. This thing was a saber-toothed tiger. Goddamn Smilodon. He fired once more, and then ran. He ran because he wanted to draw it away from his friend. He ran because, in spite of all this, his mind refused to believe he was being hunted by a living fossil. He ran because, in spite of that refusal, he could hear it tearing its way through the trees and underbrush behind him, and millions of years of prey instinct was telling his brain to shut up and hang on. He ran because he didn't know what else to do. He ran to stay alive. The deeper into the rainforest he ran, the less he recognized. Maybe it was the fear, maybe it was the mists, maybe it was the adrenaline, or the surrealness of being hunted by a saber cat. But everything started feeling older, more primal. Plants looked less modern. Strange stone carvings seemed to lurk under heavy vines. You could swear somewhere in the vast distance you could hear the cries of other creatures in the shadows, things he had never heard before, voices from a lost world. And yet all that he could let himself focus on was running, getting away, making it to a dead end. Matthew wasn't even sure where it had come from. It had been trees and vines and bushes, flowering plants, and then smack! A wall seemed to appear out of nowhere, made from a mix of giant trees and strangely carved wood. The other way was blocked by a huge waterfall pouring down what looked like either the largest tree he'd ever seen, or a cliff so overgrown it might as well be a big plant. The water washing into a large, echoing chasm below. For a moment, Matthew could swear he could see some kind of light on the other side of the water. Then the saber cat was there, blocking his way back out. It stood tall enough to look him in the face, fur marked by spots and
patterns seen on no other big cat alive. Each paw step shook through his boots, each growl as it paced closer causing his ribs to rattle like a birdcage in an earthquake. It had him, and it knew it. His rifle, empty, slid from his fingers. He could pull his sidearm, but the output of two heavy hunting rifles couldn't drop this thing. What good was a .357 revolver gonna do? Still, felt wrong to do nothing. With shaking hands, he pulled his sidearm and brought his hunting knife back up to where it had been swinging wildly this whole time. No doubt he was covered in small cuts, but he'd deal with that later. Taking aim, he quickly fired off 6 shots, striking the saber in its shoulders, though one seemed to scrape along the skull. The saber cat snarled, claws digging into the soil again, preparing for a quick pounce and a skull-crushing bite. Matthew gripped the hunting knife and glared back. "Fine. You want me, you son of a bitch?" He brought the knife up a little higher. "Come on, then. Come on!" With a roar like cannon fire, the cat lunged. In slow motion, Matthew watched it descend on him, saw the claws spreading, saw a huge, heaving thing crash into its side, exploding out the other in a sudden splash of gore. Matthew stared into the blank space the cat had been as it slammed sideways from the force of the spear now sticking out of its side. A spear that looked like it was a stripped tree branch, with a sharpened stone the size of his hand fixed into it. Motioned to his side, courses his eyes that way, as, yes, a very dead Smilodon, and toward the hide and grass-clad figure that emerged from the waterfall. It cleared the chasm with barely a grunt of effort. As he drew near, Matthew's head spun. It was a caveman, a Cro-Magnon, a Neanderthal, some bizarre mixture of the two, and big. Like 8, 9 feet big, maybe 10. He felt like an infant as he watched the huge man cover the distance and drag the spear free. He looked at it, then at the smaller man. And Matthew, well, he waited to die. He was so tired of dealing with ancient giants at this point. Yet the giant being nodded slowly and reached down, grasping one of the giant fangs and snapping it free with barely a yank. Matthew grunted as it landed in his belly, never taking his eyes off the figure as it crossed the giant death cat's corpse, lifted it over his shoulders like a bag of flowers. Then, with a final raised salute of his spear, the giant hopped over the chasm and vanished behind the waterfall. Made Dios. Matthew almost jumped out of his skin as Hugo limped over. What the hell was... Where's the cat? What was that thing? What the fuck, man? Matthew looked at the fang in his lap and shook his head. No idea, amigo. Not one damn idea. He looked around slowly. Now, how do we get home? Many days later, back in his office in Manaus, Matthew read the paper again. Hero hunters kill rogue jaguar. He and Hugo's faces, dirty, bloody, and exhausted, smiled uncertainly from the front page. Yes, they'd made it back in one piece, after finding the Smilodon's apparent lair full of half-eaten corpses. Arthur Drybeck, sadly, had been among them. His identification tucked in his shredded hunting jacket, damn near the only way the authorities could identify him once they followed Matthew's directions and the GPS coordinates. They were still trying to sort out all the bones. The report to City Hall and the Vice Governor had been tense. They were assured the rogue cat was dead, but no, we can't show you the body because it fell down a chasm. Sure, that was it. This? No, this isn't a tooth. It's just a big rock that he used to stab it. Hugo was helpful both in confirming they fought a killer cat and being a little too fuzzy still on details like where did it go and how did you kill it. Still, after almost a week of no attacks, no sightings, and an apparent repopulation of the wildlife in the area, the council was tentatively ready to believe. They paid the two their fees, got them some interviews as heroes, and told them in no uncertain terms that their story had better not change suddenly, or else. Matthew chuckled. Like I'm going to tell them the truth? He tossed the paper aside and picked up the saber's fang. No one believed me anyway. Hell, I'm not sure I believe me. He opened the drawer, dropped the fang inside, and locked it. He looked over at the picture of Hugo again and grinned. Well, till next time, amigo. And he turned out the light.